Hi, scholars. I miss seeing your face. I thought I would try something a little different. I know some of you don't like reading your chapters that I assign you, so I'm going to read through chapter 2 in social studies and, do a little commenting and stuff like that, like I normally would do in class. So you can listen along to what I'm reading, and while I'm going through it, if you want to answer the questions on the worksheet, you can do that. You can always pause the video if you want me, if you're writing something down. But anyway, and then go back and listen to it another time. And you always, of course, have the paper, well, not the paper, but the uploaded thing online in Google Classroom that you can listen to or read yourselves. But anyway, needless to say, let's do this, okay? All right, so chapter 2, new constitutions for the states. We'll start with the section that says new plan of government. And of course, the big question on there that you should be able to answer at the end of all of this is, what is a republic or a republican form of government? So the section titled New Plan of Government. Americans set about making constitutions for their new state governments. A constitution is an overall plan of government, something like an outline. It declares what powers the government will have and will not have. And then if you look on page 11, there's this lovely picture of a guy, and it says each state put its constitution in writing, and we'll discover why it was important they put it in writing here in just a little bit. But then on page 12, it says, the Constitution says, what the different parts of the government will be. It assigns duties and responsibilities to each part. The Constitution, says that this part of the government will make the laws, and that part of the government will see that they carry out the laws, and the third part will decide arguments about what a certain law means, and so on. So you see, a constitution is like a law, but it is higher than ordinary laws. It's kind of a fundamental law, and ordinary laws must fit within this fundamental law. They must get along with the Constitution, the fundamental law, or they don't count. You might think of the Constitution as a framework of a house and ordinary laws as the furniture. You have the outside walls that form your bedroom, and you have the roof and all of that. And the inside walls give you the basic form of the house. That's what the Constitution does. It gives you the basic form of the laws in our government. And you then put in your furniture into your house, right? Those are the ordinary laws. From time to time, you may need to change the furniture. Maybe your family needs have changed, like needing a bed instead of a crib. Or maybe the furniture is broken and needs to be replaced. And you can do that, right? Well, the basic laws, one thing you can't do, let me continue reading, sorry. The one thing you can't do, though, is bring in furniture that is too big for the room. It has to fit inside the room, or you can't use it. You get the idea. It says, the basic form of a house, the Constitution sets the limits on what you can put inside. As long as a law, like the furniture, fits inside the Constitution, the law is okay. If it doesn't follow the Constitution, then the law is unconstitutional. That means the law is no longer a law that has to be obeyed. Does that mean that once you have the basic form or the Constitution, that you can't change the Constitution? No, it doesn't. You can change the Constitution, just as you can build an addition on a house or move around some inside walls, but that's a much harder job than just changing the furniture. It's not a job you do easily or very often. So let's go over the next section. And of course, that was the first section, and some of the questions in your worksheet that go along with this, you should be able to answer them by now, because I would have already asked them in class. But the next section is called Rights of Englishmen and More. And of course, we're on page 13. It says, each of the 13 states, the first decision made about the new Constitution was to put it in writing. That made it a firm contract between the people and the new government. It was how the people, the governed, gave their consent. It was like the people saying, these are the things we agree that the government may do, and these are the things that the government may not do. There's the idea of limited government. So when they put it in writing, even today, like when you make an agreement with somebody, there's contracts that you sign. Like even when you get married, there's a marriage contract you sign. When you put it in writing, it makes it legal. It makes it more firm and more concrete than just saying, hey, yeah, we'll hang out together for the rest of our lives. Okay, so that's what the Constitution was. When they put it in writing, it was a firm contract of the people saying, government, this is what you can do and this is what you can't do. And let's see, next paragraph. Actually, it was quite easy for the writers of the Constitution to list what the new state governments could not do. The British King and Parliament had practically written the list for them. The governments could not search a person's home without good reason. Remember, the colonists had that issue with the British government searching their house, looking for things that they smuggled in. And they could not put a person in jail without a good reason either. And they could not keep him or her in jail without a trial. The British government tried to do that to the colonists too, and that was part of why we fought the American Revolution, right? They could also not take away a person's right to trial by jury. And if you look at the vocab word, trial by jury means a case of law decided by a group of one's fellow citizens. So you couldn't just go and have a judge who was assigned by the king or the government say, you did this thing wrong. You had to be allowed to have your peers, your friends, your neighbors be there to say, you know what? No, he didn't do that. No, yes, he did. It was up to them to decide, not somebody who nobody knew, right? That's what a trial by jury is. And finally, they could not stop people from assembling peaceably. And of course, the word for assemble, the vocab, it's just to gather together. So assembling means a bunch of people gathering together. Kind of like what we're not allowed to do right now. Anyway, but that's for health reasons. This is not the government telling you. Anyway. They could not take away the people's right to ask or even demand that their government do something they wanted done. Again, that was what the British government tried to do to the colonists before the American Revolution. They wouldn't listen to what the British colonists wanted, right? They didn't want the Tea Act, they didn't want this, they didn't want that, but the British government said, don't care, all right? Page 14. Sorry, I gotta get a little more comfortable. My knees again. Okay. So, do all of these sound familiar? Well, they should. They are the rights of Englishmen that colonists were fighting a war over at the very time. Now, again, remember, the rights of the English colonists, Englishmen were established back when you had the kings and queens like we talked about. I think it was William and Mary. They came up with that Bill of Rights for the Englishmen. Well, that's basically what this was. The idea of those rights developed in England over many years, starting in 1215 with a document called the Magna Carta, which limited the power of the monarch. Many of these new constitutions added still more rights. One was the freedom of speech. That means that people in those states were free to speak their mind and criticize the government without fear of being arrested. To give you an idea of how revolutionary an idea that was, there was no other country in the world at that time where the right of free speech was guaranteed. Even today, page 15, even today, nearly 250 years later, the great majority of the world's people still do not completely enjoy that right. You guys may not realize how nice it is and how what a freedom that is, actually. If you think about everybody's free to criticize the government, whether you are a Republican, Democrat, you like who's in office, who's not in office, how the government handles this or that. We can all complain about it online, on social media, or wherever, and not be fearful that somebody from the government is going to come and arrest us and put us in jail or do worse. There are some countries where if you speak out against the government, you could be, not a good thing, okay? Okay, anyway, let's continue on reading on page 15. It was a lot harder to say what powers the new state governments would have than which ones they shouldn't have. We always can do the nots better, right? Like, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. It's harder to come up with the, do this, do that, right? So Americans had just gotten rid of a too powerful government, the British government, and they certainly didn't want to create another one. At the same time, though, Americans were practical people. They knew it made no sense to assign the government a job and then not give it the power to do it well. For example, if they wanted their government to provide schools and build roads, they had to give the ability to pay for schools and roads. In other words, they had to give the government the power to collect taxes. And that was a tricky thing, remember? That's kind of what started the whole American Revolution, is because we didn't like the fact that we had to pay taxes and it was too much, right? So, for guidance, Americans turned to their own colonial experience. Each colony had its own assembly or a lawmaking body. Each had a governor too. But while the assemblies were elected by the colonists, most governors had been appointed by the king. Colonists understood that the governor was the king's man, not theirs. When the governor appointed people to office, he chose men the king wanted him to appoint. When he decided whether to support an act of the assembly, he checked with the king's advisors first. So colonists depended on their elected assembly, not the governor, to look after them and protect them. Now that they were independent, they continued to rely on the assembly and to distrust, not care, what the governor said. They gave their assemblies, now called legislatures, most of the power in government. The legislatures made the laws. And they figured, we elected them. They'll do what we want, not what the king wants. So they were making the laws. And they created the courts and appointed, on page 16, the judges. They appointed most of the officials in each state, even those who worked for the governor. So what power did the governor have? Well, not much. In most states, he couldn't even veto, which means disprove or kick the law out, laws that were passed by the legislature. Mostly the governor was a figurehead. That means he had a title, but not much else. At the same time, however, Americans wanted to be sure that their legislature didn't misuse their power. So in most states, representatives were elected to the legislature 1 year at a time. That way, voters could keep a really close eye on their representatives. If they weren't pleased with the representative's performance, they could replace him promptly within the year, right? And most governors also had 1 year terms. And the vocab for term is off there, and it says the length of time for which an elected official serves. We still have term limits today. Some are longer than others, and some we don't have any. Like the president of the United States has a 4-year term limit. And he can run again and get another 4-year term limit. But again, it's only 4 years. That's today. Anyway, and just one example. Page 17. So none of these state constitutions you actually use the word democracy. That's because they didn't really create a completely democratic form of government. In a true democracy, the people govern directly. Each person can vote on every matter, every proposed law. Now, think about it. You can get everyone in a village together in one place to discuss an issue and vote, right? That'd be real easy, a small number of people. You may even be able to get everyone in a small town together, like maybe Arizona City. Get everybody in Arizona City together. They could talk, they could discuss, and they could vote. But you can see how it would be impossible to do that in a large area like a state. If we got everybody in the state of Arizona to come together and you had to discuss about a law we wanted to make, and then every person had to be there and every person had to vote, that would be a little complicated, wouldn't it? So here's what you can do, however. Continuing on reading. It says you can arrange for people to elect representatives to govern for them. Of course, that's exactly what Americans have been doing for more than 100 years while they were still British colonists. When people elect representatives to govern them, that is called representative democracy as opposed to direct democracy. The resulting government is called a republic. And the definition, of course, for a republic is a government in which people elect representatives to rule for them. And that's what each state constitution provided for, a republican form of government. As you will see a bit later, that's our nation's form of government too. So when you say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, you say to the republic for which it stands, which is talking about our country. Okay, so let's go on to the next section. And of course, that section, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can answer questions for on the worksheet, supposedly by now. So if you wanted to pause right now and answer those questions and then hit play again, we can go, that way. Anyway, freedom of religion, the next section. 1 year after the Declaration of Independence, all but one American state had a brand new written constitution. Each of these documents had provisions protecting individual freedoms. In addition, many of the state legislatures passed, page 18, laws guaranteeing specific key freedoms. Nearly every state, for example, passed a law to protect religious freedom. The most famous of these laws was Virginia's Statute for Religious Freedom. Can you guess who wrote it? Thomas Jefferson. He's from Virginia, and he wrote our Declaration of Independence. Anyway, so the statute said that the state government could not interfere in any way with the religious beliefs of its citizens. As Jefferson later said, "It does me no injury for my neighbors to say that there are 20 gods or no God. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg." What that means is, if his neighbor had 20 gods or didn't think there was God at all, it didn't hurt him one way or another, because it didn't affect him. That was their thing, and he had his thing. Okay? So because it does no one any injury, and because the right of religious freedom was unalienable, remember part of that whole Declaration of Independence thing, the state should not concern itself with a person's religious beliefs. Today, we call this idea the separation of church and state. It means that the government, the state, has no power to establish an official state religion, page 19. Now, if you remember back when we talked about the kings and queens of England, you had King Henry VIII, and he established the Church of England, or what? Yeah. So they established a state religion because, he wanted a divorce, right? Anyway, that's what our government doesn't do. We can't establish a state religion. It's not like, everybody has to be Christian or Mormon or Muslim or whatever, or no religion whatsoever. Okay, it just doesn't matter. That doesn't affect the government. A related basic right is called a freedom of conscience. Okay, and conscience, the vocab word there, a sense or belief a person has that a certain action is right or wrong. This means that the government cannot tell people what church they should belong to or what they should believe. These are some of the most important freedoms we have. So our government can't say, well, you should believe this, and you should go to church every Sunday, and you should do this, or you should read this, or, whatever. Okay? Also, many Americans realized that slavery contradicted their belief that all humans were equal and had unalienable rights. As a result, 5 northern states passed laws to end slavery immediately. Other states would gradually free their slaves. No southern state was willing to do that, but several did make it easier for slave owners to free their enslaved workers if they wished to. Some did. So, state constitution making was very successful. As it turns out, it was much more successful than the first try at national constitution making. So these first constitutions that were made, they were made by the states. We're not talking about our U.S. Constitution, which we have, that is for federal government. That is the next chapter, and that was a whole mess that we're going to talk about later. But anyway, so that wraps up the reading for this chapter. So now you should be able to go and answer all the reading comprehension questions and the big question that's on that worksheet for chapter 2. As always, if you have questions, you can reach out to me during my Google Meets Hangout video time or on one of the little chat things, and I will be happy to try and answer your questions. During the day especially, I'll try and do that, and I'll try, if you're working on it, in the evening, like after 5 o'clock, okay? But I gotta do me stuff too, okay? So hopefully that helps out, and I'll try doing this again with the next chapter, and maybe even for some science. Ooh, I don't know. Anyway, we'll see. Have a good evening. Bye.